Evening all. Okay, evening all. I'm just going to start on Play Chess as well, streaming. I'm hoping there's going to be a few technical issues. I'm hoping for doing this. Sometimes there is. Okay, I thought I'd go over this evening for an hour some of Emil Sutovsky's games, who's one of the top seeds in the London Classic FIDE Open. I'm hoping the audio is okay. Let's quickly check this. Try to configure the microphone before starting. Hopefully that might reduce the issues experienced last time. Checking. Audio okay, I hope. Any audio? The sound. Hello? Checking 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. Checking 1 2 3. Requesting stream info. So if I said, is there any audio, any sound? I hear you. Cool. All right, we can go on then. All right, so Emil Sutovsky is currently one of the top rated players in the FIDE Open. I thought we could look at some of his notable games, then look at some of the games he's just recently played in this FIDE Open. Right, some of the more notable games are very, very exciting. I think you may agree. So let's have a look against Ilya Smirin, played in the Israeli Championships in Tel Aviv in 2002. So going back quite a bit, 11 years. Let's see what happened. E4. And Smirin played the Sicilian defense. We saw knight c3, knight c6, knight f3. And you might want to try this sometimes. It's trying to get black into an uncomfortable position with a suspended d4. But black tried to punish white a little bit with e5, just ruling out d4. But it weakens, these light squares a little bit to play this. Okay, so we get a different type of game where often actually playing for f4 later becomes an idea. We're going to see that maybe in this game. So bishop c4, d6, d3. So white has a good grip on the light squares at the moment. Bishop e7. That avoids any problem, I think, with knight g5. If knight f6 has been played immediately, I think knight g5 is probably a pain. So bishop, this move order seems safer. So white castled. Now we see knight f6. So now knight g5, black can castle. But white does this anyway. He plays knight g5 anyway, because it does mean the f pawn is free to advance. Black castled. Now f4. Okay, so we've got a kind of almost like a Vienna game where you play an f4 and the bishop seems quite nice on c4 here. E takes f4. Is there a problem? Is this bishop a problem? Is knight e5 a problem at some point? Well, white played bishop f takes f4. So possibly there's an idea that if absolutely needed, maybe bishop takes e5 could be considered. But at the moment, h6, the knight just goes back. And white for the moment has got good control, it seems, over the e5 square. But we see bishop e6. And now what looks to be quite a curious move is played here. I think this is the thing with these notable games in particular. I think if you want to create brilliant games, it seems statistically you want to aim to damage your pawn structure as much as possible. And that is a terrible thing to say. But here's part one of the evidence. If you want to damage your pawn structure as much as possible, the dynamic compensation gains are quite huge sometimes. And here we see it with the move knight d5. I don't know how many of you would play knight d5 in this position. So it's inviting, you know, doubled pawns here, but what could one get for it? That's the really exciting thing to consider. So from a static point of view, you'd think this is horrible, you know, but from a dynamic point of view, what happens if black really wants to do this? Well, he did. He played bishop takes d5, and with the absence of that light square bishop, we see that this f5 square is a little bit weaker than it would have been. Is that significant? So we see e takes d5, so look, double pawns, knight a5, and an even more severe consideration is that white might even lose this centre pawn with this aggressive move b5. So this has to be factored in, but white does have this f5 square to play with without black having the light square bishop. And what white does is totally ignore the possibility of b5. He just plays knight h4, so he's going to get into that f5 square quite quickly. So black doesn't really want to play now knight takes c4 in this position, although it might seem quite tempting to play knight takes c4, because you might think, well, is there a tactic? Let's have a quick look. You might think there's a tactic with knight takes d5. I'm not really sure this works. You know, queen takes d5, we're on d6 at minimum. So what black did was play b5. So it looks as though if the bishop moves to b3, then actually c4 is pretty embarrassing, trapping the bishop almost, or, you know, driving it away to a horrible square. But no, this is not the idea. Again, the dynamics are really celebrated here. Really celebrated. Knight f5 is played, just sacking the bishop. Just giving it up. So very, very interesting idea. So it all stems from first accepting the double pawns. So we have this very aggressive knight, it seems, on f5. One of Kasparov's favourite places for a knight is actually f5. I think he's mentioned that. B takes c4. And now, further trying to break down the black king position, we see bishop takes h6. And it's difficult to respond to this, really. If rook e8, then it looks quite delicious to play bishop takes g7. The attack would seem to be very, very powerful here. You know, moves like this, or just queen g3 for knight h6. It looks too dangerous. So black gobbled this one up as well with g takes h6. So its two pieces have been sacrificed. On the upside of that, black's king safety seems a little bit precarious here. White has got at least 3 attacking pieces ready to try and attack the king with. Knight f5 now, and we see black probably not playing the best defensive move, but it seems a bit tricky. The knight has to stand guard of the h5 square clearly. If the rook move, that's interesting to consider. There's also like the rook lifts to consider. So it's pretty dangerous. In fact, with this structure, it seems this is a very comfortable looking attack, even though it's 2 pieces down. This position here, I'm not entirely sure what's black's best defense. Haven't engine checked this or anything. Black plays c takes d3. Kaputnik has asked the question on Play Chess, not the rook. I'm not sure. Can you be more precise with the move number for the questions? Not the rook. I'm not entirely sure. Oh, you might mean not. Yeah, he wants to bring the knight back to f5 first before doing anything. So okay, so here black played c takes d, queen takes d3, and the king gets out of the way. So this seems to be a reasonable defensive idea. I think the idea is that queen h3, we can play knight h7. Now white put the pressure in the centre though with rook a e1, hitting that bishop, and black responded with queen b6, now threatening c4 check. So we can't take that bishop just yet, because we don't want the queens coming off, even if there is queen e3, because, you know, black is 2 pieces up. White actually threw in this check, queen h3 check, knight h7, and it's here he goes just 1 piece down with rook takes e7. So black's not so chirpy now about material. There's also seemingly a very nasty threat of queen c3 lurking around here. Queen c3 check among other things. c4 check is played, king h1, and the queen tries to defend things from afar with queen takes b2. So can this diagonal be useful? Well, we get now a very neat rook maneuver. We get rook e4 in this position, and it looks as though, well, rook h4 is threatened. If black doesn't do anything too quickly, what's going to happen with things like rook h4? That does seem like exceptionally dangerous here. Black tried rook g8, and it does look as though rook h4 is pretty dangerous. I wonder if anyone can spot any defense here. This wasn't played rook h4. No, a much stronger move was played. Possibly with the queen on b2. Actually, we can play rook g7. Maybe that was the idea. That was the ambition of black, to play this and hope to survive. But white played a crushing move in this position. So, and by the way, if you've got the notation tab, can you switch away from it for these guess the moves? So what would you play here if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? A really crushing move. Any ideas? So I'm hoping, yeah, you're away from the notation tab if you're on Play Chess for this. So white to play. Okay, so white doesn't need to give black the chance for rook g7. So with a powerful forcing move, queen takes h7 check. He's forcing through a mate, really. So black resigned here. If he took, we have check. Now let's see what's happening here. I assume it's the check here. Here. Now how do we mate the black king? From this position. Let's try rook h6 check, king g5 looks interesting. I think there's a forcing move h4 check. This looks interesting to drag the king down. King g4, knight e3 check. King g3, rook f3. Now was that all forced? Let's have a quick look at that. Rook h6 check, king g5. So does anyone have any objections to this? I should have checked this before the game really, because I risk really embarrassing myself severely just now. So h4 check I think is the move here. I could have just asked you guys to solve it as well. That would have been cheating as well. So h4 check. I think this is a force mate with h4 check. Does anyone see anything more optimal here? I think this seems reasonably optimal. I think there's only one square for the king. We just check this. There's only one square. Okay, so it's fairly clear cut perhaps. Knight e3 check. There's only one square again, and it's all running with check. So it seems all pretty good. Okay, so what do we learn from this game? It seems that if you want to have a fantastic attack, getting structural damage can sometimes be welcomed. So in this example, it seems the crazy looking knight d5 got access to f5, which was the start of a raging attack. So there's a bit of dynamism there, which is interesting to consider. Now on that note, let's have a look at another one of his notable games from the Gibraltar Masters. So this is quite a sweet game from 2005, and we're going to flip the board. So e4, c5. He plays the Sicilian defense. His opponent Alexander Areshchenko 2570 in this game. Now the Gibraltar Masters in 2005 might also have been with quite a big time increment, possibly 2 minutes extra each move. Let's see, knight f3 d6, c3 knight f6, and now this system which I think Daniel Kopek, an United States international master, who actually is one of the 2 international masters I've beaten in long time limits. I think this is the Kopek system with bishop Kopek system with bishop d3. He's also, by the way, Kopek is, on the side though, I think is a renowned computer scientist. So bishop d3, knight c6, bishop c2. So it seems to be applying, you know, Ruy Lopez principles to the Sicilian defence. That in the Ruy Lopez you sometimes got a bishop on c2, and White's just aiming for d4 as well. It's got a few, you know, Ruy Lopez characteristics. Bishop g4 pinning the knight, d3, e6, and Black's changing the formation of the structure to go in a sort of French defence style with the bishop outside the pawn chain. White castled, d5. So you might think this is quite a nice pawn structure. Knight bd2, queen c7, h3, bishop h5. It's an annoying pin. With that bishop over there, this is more annoying than it usually would be. There's no bishop coming to e2 to rescue this knight, to unpin it. Yes, by the way, this is live, yes. So rook e1 was played here. And in aggressive style, I mean, I think Emil Sutovsky does take a dynamic approach in his games. He castles queenside here. So it looks as though, you know, d takes might be interesting with that rook on d8, possibly. But let's see, queen e2. No, he keeps the tension going with the pawns in the centre for the moment. He plays bishop e7. And we see a3, as though White's interested in playing for b4 later. But is Black going to start an attack? Well, he played a very aggressive, hyper-aggressive move, g5. Just, you know, to get in g4. White played e5. And now not moving this knight, he just plays g4 here. He's trying to wrench open this g file quite quickly. What can White do here? If he plays like this, then, you know, we're just going to take and we're going to attack the queen. So White just took on f6. We see g takes. Now White actually played queen e3. Let's have a quick look at that. If knight takes f3, I don't think this is that brilliant for White. Bishop takes f6, and White's, you know, still going to struggle because this g file gives Black certain pressure against his king. So we see queen e3, and now bishop takes f6. Looks as though there's 2 loose pieces if bishop takes f6. If we have loose pieces and there's a double attack, we end up losing material usually. So is this going to be played? Is bishop takes f6 viable? Well, Emil did leave 2 loose pieces. Loose piece alert, double attack alert. In fact, there is a double attack, queen h6. Is he just losing a piece? With both bishops hanging, but this g file does offer something very concrete here. Rook hg8, just ignoring both bishops. Black wants to play rook takes g2 and bring the queen to h2 after rook takes g2 check. No easy defense here. If g3, I think we could just crash through with rook takes g3. You know, this pawn will help just mating the white king. So White takes one of the bishops. He plays queen takes h5. And here is the bit of magic coming up, which really impressed me, to be honest. This really is good. Rook takes G2 check. King F1. Obviously not King H1. There's Queen H2 mate. So King F1. And you might think, well, hold on a sec. White's banking on something. What is White banking on? Queen H2 here. It would seem that Queen takes F3 might be a defensive try. It's also, by the way, hitting the bishop as well as defending F2. But we get this really nifty move here. In this position, we get a really, really incredibly nifty move. So if I give you 20 seconds, and I hope on PlayChess, you know, you're on a different tab to the notation tab. So what would you play here with black? So I'll give you 20 seconds here, black to play. Anyone? Any ideas? So what did Emil Sutovsky do here? Okay, I'll show you. So black to play. I mean, I don't think any other move might do. I mean, it might be that sort of sharp, this position. He played bishop d4. So the threat is rook takes f2. So any queen takes f3 here, we can just win that queen with rook takes f2, and the attack should rage on actually quite well. So white seems compelled to take the bishop. I'm not sure if there's any other great idea here apart from taking the bishop. If we played knight takes f3, then check seems quite dangerous indeed. Check, and we can crash through like this, and you know, we've got all these mate threats. So the bishop was taken after bishop d4. So with c takes d4, and the funny thing about this c takes d4, it's kind of weakened black's control of the d4 square to capture on d4. That's quite an interesting observation, I thought, just tactically. I know you can work out all these forcing move tactics, but what's actually happened technically is white's control of d4 has actually been weakened by capturing on d4. It's something strange and peculiar to note about this. So now queen h2 is played, and the point is revealed. You know, with d4 loosened up here, this is a total disaster. If rook e2, we just play rook g1. We don't bother taking the rook. Let's play rook g1 mate, or queen g1 mate, or queen h1 mate, take a pick. So what does white do? If knight takes f3, then rook takes f2 is mate. So white plays queen takes f3, and now, you know, we use this weakened d4 square. Rook g1 check, king e2, knight takes d4. There's no c pawn protecting d4 anymore. It's been spent. The protection on d4 has been spent, and we're winning the white queen. But even crueler, we can win it with style by taking the rook first, and then white resigned. So he's losing the queen. In fact, we might even consider other sadistic things, but no, I think just winning the queen should be okay, and then take it from there. So I thought that was quite a nifty tactic. Bishop d4, probably quite easy to miss. You know, this kind of tactical idea. So a ruthless game opening up that G file. Note that the double pawns that I mentioned, there is double pawns, and what's happened is the G file dynamic. But from ugly pawns we get fantastic dynamism. There are double pawns, as I promised, to mention. But we get the G file dynamic. It doesn't matter about losing a piece after that. The G file dynamic, along with bishop d4, that's a pretty fantastic move to soften white's d4 control. So let's go on to another game. So this game was played in 2009 against Ernesto Inarkiev. This was in the 10th Karpov tournament, celebrating Karpov, Anatoly Karpov. So it played in Russia, 4th of June 2009. E4, and we're going to flip the board. He was playing white. I think this more emphasizes the concept of double pawns as well, so for dynamics. So let's see. And it's from a very, very sterile opening indeed, this knight f6, this Petrov, dry, reputation solid. Knight takes e5, d6, he retreats the knight. Knight takes e4, nothing too crazy with knight c3, which does offer double pawns, but he doesn't play that one. He plays d4. So after d5, bishop d3, knight c6. White should be careful here. I think from experience of a correspondence game, I played c4 a bit too quick with the king in the centre. There's always bishop b4 to be watching out for here. White just castles now. Bishop e7. Rook e1. Black played bishop g4, pinning this knight. It seems quite... It's all looking pretty standard so far. c4. Which seems to be walking into something horrible actually, because there's this pin would seem to be putting pressure on d4. So you might think c3 is sometimes more appropriate. Depending on the configuration of pieces, you might consider c3 to be more solid, designed against this pin and this quick knight c6. But no, c4 was played. Well, it's trying to undermine, loosen this knight on e4. We see knight f6. Knight c3 now is played. And with this pin, black tries to sort of make use of the pin. You know, what's the matter, you'd think, with this next move? Knight takes d4. Why not? How is black getting punished for this? Well, we see c takes d5. And now the threat is, as Chessbase is highlighting, the threat is queen a4 check. Quite useful actually, to scoop up a piece here. And you know, if castles, then maybe, you know, bishop takes h7 check and we win d4, and we're still protecting d5. So black in this position damaged white's pawns. Bishop takes f3. So as I mentioned, you know, double pawns, they look quite ugly here, disgusting. So what is the dynamic compensation? It's interesting. I mean, what is the dynamic compensation? Well, actually, if castles, then immediately again there's bishop takes h7, and we can pick up d4. So black tries to stabilise that knight by playing c5. But things don't end here. It's not about this G file now. I mean, it will take some time to make use of this G file, and in the meantime we'd lose this centre pawn and horrible things could happen, perhaps. Not immediately with that, because the king's still in the centre. But we see white playing a sharp move here, d6, forcing matters. Queen takes d6, and now knight b5. So trying to exploit that king still in the centre. So if the knight took, we just play bishop takes, and that's pretty horrible. Horrible looking for black in terms of king safety. So black played queen d7, And now we see knight takes d4, c takes d4, and the king is kept in the center with queen e2, keeping the king in the center. It's probably worth mentioning here what would happen if castles actually. You see, actually one virtue of the double pawns is that there's no back row mate. So queen takes e7 doesn't quite back row mate white. We can just take, I believe, rook takes, king g2, knight takes, and that doesn't seem right because we're the exchange down. That's not it. That's not it. Scrub that. Whoops. Okay. Quick question for you all. In this position, maybe bishop b5. Okay. Bishop b5 first might be why queen takes e7. Before I give you all the questions bail out here, I think bishop b5 first is much stronger, actually, coming to think about it, for taking on e7. I don't think d3 helps. If the queen moves, queen takes e7, and we've ruled out e8. In fact, we're back row mating black anyway. Sorry, we're just back. We just ruled out we're attacking the queen. So it's bishop b5. Pardon me. Bishop b5 first would win that bishop. So this helps explain, I think, why king f8 was played instead of castling. The double pawns did help white's king safety there for avoiding any major issue really with back row mates. So bishop b5 is played here in any case, and the queen must keep protecting the bishop. So we see queen d8, and now we see queen d3. And you might think, what's going on here with queen d3? Well, h5, bishop g5, so it would be a nasty pin on the queen actually if the bishop moved. Queen d5 hitting both bishops. This looks quite nasty, but fortunately this one's protected, so it's not such a big deal. And in fact the queen might actually be misplaced here. But what else? Black, I think by this stage was in a passive position. Let's have a quick look. If let's give an example. So if queen b6, I think king safety issues here, like rook takes e7, are rampant because we've got things like queen a3 check. I mean, this sort of thing can start to look dangerous. I'm not entirely sure concretely actually how this smashes black, but queen b6 wasn't tried. It was queen d5, and white just plays f4, which not just protects the bishop, but there's something else after bishop d8. Check, king g8, and in broad daylight now, can you see the final move? Something horrible happens here to black. So if I gave you 20 seconds here, what would you play with white? Starting from now. The final move of the game. Just as the king is escaping as well, something else happens. Anyone? Any ideas? There's a bit of a delay on the stream, so I'm trying to give it a few more seconds. I'm hoping you've seen it by now. Some of you. Okay, the final move was rook e5, and actually the queen's been kind of checkmated. There's no queen move here or here. You know, we've got queen here. No, here we've got that covered. Rook's protecting the bishop. No, here. The queen's just been checkmated. So that was interesting. Not quite to do with too much of the dynamics, but you can see he's willing to accept these, you know, dynamic pawn structures in these games. So we come back to the London Classic, where I promised I might summarise some of the live work I've been doing the last few days. So he's leading currently the London Classic FIDE Open, and I think he's the top FIDE rated seed. And the Super GMs come tomorrow to the London Classic, but just for rapid games this year. But let's see. So in the London Classic FIDE Open, so just played a few days ago on the 7th in round 1. The 2600s had an easy time in round 1. They were paired with lots of 2100s. So lambs to the slaughter. So what happened here to his opponent? Nicola Pien Barker, only 2139. So completely outrated, but how did Emil do this game, playing this game? Actually, it was a bit of a surprise for me, for what was picked up from an engine view on this game, but I think it showed that Emil takes risks. So c takes d5, knight takes d5. He's playing a Grunfeld for the moment. It looks fairly standard Grunfeld stuff until this move bishop e3, which is probably fairly standard, but there's also, you know, things like bishop c4. There's all sorts of moves really. So c5, queen d2, queen a5, rook c1. It looks like a comfortable Grunfeld for the moment. Black castled, knight f3, knight d7, d5. And okay, I thought black's with d5 getting some control on the dark squares, some pressure on the dark squares, and was got it all under control. So he plays actually a really aggressive move, f5 here. And part of this is to undermine white's d pawn, and part of it maybe to get some f-file activity. We see e takes, rook takes. So some pressure on d5, c4, encouraging exchange of queens. Black doesn't want an exchange of queens. He plays queen a3, bishop e2, and I'm pretty sure this is a risk. I'm not entirely sure it will be part of Emil Sutovsky's vast, you know, theoretical opening knowledge. He plays what I thought, well, Engine View picks this up as a risk, this b5. So you might think, how significant is this? Well, I thought it was reasonably significant. Let's see, white castled here. Bishop b7. The thing is, this diagonal points to black's king, so this undermining operation, you could say, is taking a few liberties here, and I think that was kind of exposed technically. White didn't want to test black here with c takes b and played knight g5, but in fact it would seem c takes b, if we want to test black, I wonder what Emil would have played in this position, because, you know, rook takes d5, we have bishop c4. And that looks pretty nasty. As I say, I think black's taking some liberties. And the thing is, from an engine point of view, engines don't seem to be impressed with this position after bishop takes d5. Do you know why? Even though it promises the a pawn, which actually, as it turned out, was the reason black ended up winning this game, because of this a pawn and this passed a pawn here, which was created. But do you know what's wrong with this position? If I gave you 20 seconds here, what would you play as white starting from now? Any ideas? Yeah, this wasn't played, and I guess, to be fair, there's no telling if black would have gone in for this. Black did have another choice. Black didn't have to go in for this, right? Before we just show this, maybe knight b6. But on the other hand, knight b6 doesn't seem to be that pleasant because the bishop takes c5. But let's imagine, okay, this was the case, that bishop takes d5 was going to be played. But it takes a computer, I suppose, to see these things. g4 just seems to be totally end of game. I mean, just winning material. Look, we've even got a loose rook on a8. This is fun, isn't it? Rook takes f3, queen takes d5 check. We're going to lose a8 as well. It's a nice fork. Triple. So anyway, white believed black's rating, I think. White was only 2-1-3-9, did I mention that? So knight g5 was played instead. And this works like a treat now, this pawn chain undermining to win a2 and win the game. So b takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight b6, get rid of the danger on the diagonal. Queen d3. Knight takes c4, happens to protect the queen, unfortunately. Queen takes c4, bishop takes d5. So white's pawn chain has just been wrecked. And he's losing the a pawn. And funny enough, the rook's quite well placed to support this passed a pawn. So we now see the technique kick in of pushing the a pawn and using that horrendous diagonal now. e4 is immediately threatened to win material here. The rook's not too clever on a1. Bishop takes f3, e4 attacking the rook and swapping off rooks really. And now black's actually going another pawn up now. After rook d5, e takes f3, so 2 pawns up, and that's nice to stop the king from doing anything as well. Bishop c1, rook b8, and here white resigned. Now it just shows that even 2650 GMs, they take risks. Yeah, this is not the case in, say, Ivanov's games. If you look at Ivanov's games, he doesn't play moves like f5. He crushes GMs without any risk. There's no errors. People don't seem to appreciate that. The errors exist in Grandmaster games because humans make mistakes and take risks. And this was a gigantic risk against even a 2139. A gigantic risk to play in this way, but it totally paid off. So there's another thing about the psychology of ratings though. If you're playing someone 500 points higher, then trust creeps in. Why wouldn't it? If you're playing someone 2657. So okay, it was a good game to a point. Let's have a look at another game from the FIDE Open. Now this is I thought was really quite It was stunning to follow this live, this game, against Richard Bates. So Emil Sutovsky against Richard Bates. E4, C5, Knight C3, and Richard Bates plays A6, Knight GE2, perhaps a little bit unusual, not putting the knight here. White's maybe going to do this, closed Sicilian, there's a threat of the closed Sicilian, D6, but now we get actually the open Sicilian instead, with D4 instead of D3. C takes, knight F6. And this looks like a fairly standard position in the Najdorf. But we see now H3. And it looks as though intuitively G4, Bishop G2 helps control the D5 square. And I guess the psychology here is Richard Bates statistically likes the Najdorf structure with pawn on E5, but you know that D5 can be a problem, that D5 square, especially in the light of this kind of plan, because you know a knight can be driven from G5. White's accentuating control of D5 here, but anyway, E5 is played anyway. It's an addiction, maybe Richard Bates is addicted to this structure. Doesn't matter what White does. So knight B3, bishop E6. Doesn't that just cover up the D5 hole? Does it? Interesting. The problem here, well, maybe it's highlighted. It looks like a bit of a crazy move. Probably, I don't know what the computers say about this particular move. But F4. So it's actually leaving both bishops exactly where they are to play this move F4. So we can pick up tempo gains. You know, if E takes, then we can just immediately move this bishop to take on F4, immediately target D6 and do stuff like this. That's possible. But also, of course, it threatens F5, a tempo gain on the bishop. And this causes Richard Bates, I think, to play in a crazy way now. And it could have been, you know, his immortal game if this paid off. So let's see, knight C6. Now F5, seemingly, with White having a positionally crushing grip on D5. You know, if the bishop just went back normally here, then G4, and we're looking forward to bishop G2, and maybe bishop E3, queen D2. We've got a gigantic grip on the D5 square, which looks completely pleasant. As well as that, we've got a built-in attack with G5. So Richard Bates probably didn't fancy this position, so he went a bit crazy here with bishop takes B3, which is like a positional violation, because Black was a bit weak on the light squares, and giving up the light square bishop generally you don't want to do without a good reason. So the good reason here was this rather stunning concept, actually, D5, breaking in the centre. E takes D5, and I thought the idea was knight D4, and this might be an interesting idea. I don't know how bad this would go. Knight D4, because then we would have bishop C5. For me, this didn't look, you know, too terrible, but there was a shock here for everyone watching this game. As Richard Bates, he played knight takes D5, just giving up an entire knight for this check. Now, I think the right move was played here. If queen takes D5, I think this might help justify Black in the check, because we get a tempo gain at least with rook D8 on the queen, and it might be quite nasty. Nasty things might happen. But no, White actually played knight takes D5, which frees the C pawn for supporting the knight later. And this is very important now. Check. And you might think, well, this is a bit uncomfortable, surely. If king E2, for example, what if knight D4 check? This looks quite good. It looks very dangerous. But actually white played king d2, so he's avoiding the knight d4 check with tempo. Black castled queenside, and now the knight was supported with c4. And at this stage I still thought black had some very interesting attacking opportunities with knight b4, for example. But apparently there's not too much going on here after knight b4. I think it might have been just king e2, and you know, white's got defensive resources. It might have been king e2 in this position, but black chose queen d4 check, and it just turned out that, you know, white's a piece up, and it doesn't seem entirely clear in this continuation where black's attack is going. So knight d4 check, king f2, knight takes f5, queen g4 pins that knight, and of course this knight is protecting e3, check, bishop e2, h5, and now not moving the queen but instead attacking white, the black queen, rook ac1, and it seems to be virtually all over now after the queen's come off. But you know, white is basically a piece up for not much. The game lasted quite a bit longer after this. Let's just quickly see what happened after. Check, rook h4, threatening e4 mate. That does need to be parried. Bishop d3 did parry that. Knight takes, king takes, e4. So white's essentially a piece up. And this was a nice pawn sack though, b4. So he's getting rid of his double pawns and making way for the c pawn. So materially, actually now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's two pawns for the piece. But with that pawn sack, it's like he's trying to get the black king in trouble now, which he does, because c6 now threatens c7 check. Knight f6 hits the rook for knight d7 check. Now quite a nifty move here. C takes b7 check. Means actually king takes d7. I don't think this is possible because of taking here. Here check, and rook takes d8. We're still a piece up. So Richard Bates tried this. We see knight c5 check, knight e6, doubling, bishop takes a6, and the final move, bishop c8. So anyway, it was an interesting concept there from black in the opening, but Sutovsky did seem to sort of go for the attack with his extra piece, as you would. It does constitute an advantage to go for the attack. Why not? So, and in the game yesterday against Qf3 Kh8, this was really aggressive play from black. So Qf3 Kh8 trying to keep things quite solid against Emil Sutovsky. So just played yesterday, King's Indian fianchetto variation. We see e5, c6, black taking on d4, knight g4, and this rather aggressive idea of f5 is facilitated pretty soon. So bishop takes d4, bishop goes back for the moment. It's too dangerous to take on d6 apparently. If taking on d6 there's knight e5 all the time, with problem on c4. You know, for example, we've got knight takes c4. And we're on the bishop. Bishop's on the knight. So white tried to keep solid with queen e2, rook e8, bishop d2. Now f5. Really aggressive stuff from black, playing black for a win against, you know, British Grandmaster Kh8. Queen f1, knight c5. Now a5 stopping b4, it seems. f3 looks like a passive move to have to play. Took on e4, knight takes e4, bishop f5. And if you look at all of black's pieces here, they're really quite aggressive. So I think black's got a dream position out of the king's engine here. Bishop g5, queen b6, bishop e3. Now black takes on e4, and if this is the start of a huge dark square strategy. F takes queen b4, bishop f4, bishop e5. We'll see that with this isolated pawn and these pawns, you know, nice blockades on dark squares are about to emerge. So a4, again, part of the dark square strategy to get all the pawns on light squares and celebrate the dark square blockades. King h1, knight e6, b3, a3. So this grip is intense and it sidelines d6 as a theoretical weakness. It's very, very difficult to try and exploit d6 now. Rook f1, knight d4. I just thought this was very impressive, this position for black. Queen d3, but I wasn't sure how black was going to end up winning it. Rook takes f1, bishop takes c5. There's nothing really to exploit the d5 square, no knight or anything. This bishop's a bit hemmed in by its own structure. What's happened after? Bishop d2, queen b6, b4, rook f8, b takes, queen takes, bishop e3. Bishop went back. Sorry, I'm just in the middle of something. Sorry. Hello? Okay, I'll just a minute. Okay, alright, cheers then. Okay, it's a bit of a grind from here actually. Let's have a quick look at it. Rook d1, queen e5. So black's got that, still that dark square control. And let's see, bishop g2, how did this go after this? Queen d5, rook e8, bishop f4. Black took the queens off. And what has emerged is a 2-to-1 pawn majority here. White's bishop here is still a bit hemmed in by his own pawns, but it doesn't seem that bad for the moment. Knight takes f4, g takes, b5. If black's left alone to his own devices, he will play b4, b3, and a2, trying to queen this a pawn. But white's trying to prove this isn't so easy. Keith played e5. And this bishop can come as a sort of hero potentially to try and stop these two passed pawns, this passed pawn potential. b4, bishop f1. So it's coming heroically on this diagonal. b3. But is it enough? A takes, and there's a problem. A takes means bishop b5 to a4 would block the rook, which means rook a1 would actually pick up the pawn. So I think this is a problem for black. He plays d takes e5, trying to keep this diagonal open. Bishop c4 now, and we've got this possibility of b4 now, but still black has got this important a pawn still and plays e4. d6 check, king f8, for the moment, technically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, equal on pawns. b4, bishop c3. But there's another problem with bishop c3. It's eyeing e1 as well as a1. These two pawns are mega dangerous. There's e3 and e2 to try and queen this one as well. So bishop c3, I think, is the start of the end after bishop c3. It's like a double attack on the queening squares. One of these pawns is going to be docking soon to become a queen. So if white did play b5, I think e3 is overloading the bishop here. If bishop e2, we just play a2 and we're queening here, and vice versa. If bishop a2, then we're queening there. So white's losing a key pawn actually here. King g2 is played. Rook a8 with the threat of a2 imminent. That's blocked. Now the king can come to the rescue on e3 to f3 to block here on e2, but black just picks up his pawn, so he is an extra pawn up now. Rook d4, rook b8, bishop e6, e3, now threatening e2, king f3, now e2 is played anyway. That has to be taken. Bishop c5. The king's been lured to this e-file because of rook e8. Looks pretty menacing. To win material. Or just to play for a2. It's a nasty pin for a2 as well. White tried here rook d2. Now rook e8. And d7 check. Sorry, d7 means that at least white's going to try and get material back with his passed pawn. This is just taken though, and here Keith looks at this position for quite a while, I think, and resigned. Now the reason white resigned here is because either bishop b6 or flicking rook e3. I think bishop b6 is clear enough. This passed pawn, this extra pawn here, would appear to be winning. For example, like this, we have rook e8. So we don't want that king and pawn ending. That pawn's just queening. So if we move the rook somewhere, then just rook a8. And if we get this position, we get a zugzwang because the king just comes up here in this position, and white's just basically run out of moves eventually to reach a zugzwang, where it's a completely lost position. This rook can't move, and the king would give up a key square here, so it's just totally lost. So Keith sort of Arkell saw all of that and just kind of resigned for all that happened. So this is Emil Sutovsky. Very interesting dynamic player really, playing in the London Classic FIDE Open, and he's on 3 out of 3, so tomorrow will be a tough game, but I'll be looking at his games of interest. I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, thanks for coming. Comments or questions on YouTube, and see you next week.